Welcome to Ability Assistance. My name is Phyllis Jones, Chair of the North Andover Commission on Ability Assistance.
My name is Stacey Leibowitz, Secretary of the North Andover Commission on Ability Assistance.
North Andover residents, please stay tuned after the show for important information about various town announcements. Today's special guest is State Senate Minority Leader Bruce Tarr. Thank you, Bruce.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here with both of you. I think this is an incredible show. I'm so glad to be a part of it, but I also want to thank both of you and the Commission for the work that you do every day on issues ranging from accessibility to education, a whole wide range of things. And I really think that you set the example for commissions across the state, and I'm so proud to be able to work with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
We couldn't do it, though, without your office and the help of other offices like yours, because anytime I pick up the phone, somebody's there, somebody helps, somebody provides services. So it's really a two-way street.
Well, you know, it's a real partnership, and you know, a lot of folks, when they look at the legislature, they think that the most important thing in our day may be working on a particular piece of legislation or debating on the floor, and those things are certainly important.
Yes.
Of course.
But it's also very important for us to be able to respond to the needs of individual constituents and making sure that we help them, and in that respect, we are partners.
Yes.
We work at the state level to make resources available and to make connections, and you work to make sure that those things meet the targets that we set for them with individuals or with programs or whatever. And without that team, we wouldn't be nearly as effective. So it's a real pleasure to work with both of you, and again, and the Commission.
No, we really do appreciate that. And we've done so many projects together, and we've got more to come, right?
We sure do.
So we've got the turnover in the legislative session, and a lot of people don't realize we've got the turnover on the Fed and the turnover on the state.
Sure.
And on the federal side, congressmen and federal senators, and then on the state side, state reps and state senators put together their agenda for the upcoming session. What's yours?
Well, so I first have to say, sometimes that agenda gets reflected in the filing of pieces of legislation, and sometimes it's actually more thematic, and we seek to achieve our goals through documents like the budget, which can be so impactful, not only in terms of spending, but also in terms of public policy. But I do want to let you know that as of the filing deadline for legislation for this session, which is a 2-year session, the House and the Senate filed over 6,000 bills.
Oh my God.
So it's a lot to consider, and it's a 2-year period, but those 2 years go by very quickly when you're trying to think about 6,000 pieces of legislation.
If you could put a percentage on that, if humanly possible,
Sure.
of those 6,000 bills, what are bills that were reintroduced, or what number of bills were reintroduced that died in committee
Sure.
at the end of the session?
You know, I haven't really thought about it that much, Phyllis, but if I had to guess, I would say probably about 60% of those bills are actually refiles. And there are a lot of reasons that happens.
Right.
And one of them is a particular bill might make momentum and just doesn't get over the goal line. And so you're trying to pick up from where you left off. And sometimes a bill winds up in a study, and you want to pick up there and carry on because you don't think it got the full consideration that it deserves.
Yes.
So in legislating, like in other parts of our lives, persistence is everything. And so you have to make sure to follow up. And there have been bills that I've been involved with that have taken 7, 8, 10 years to get passed.
Oh, wow.
But all the while that those bills are being considered, more legislators are learning about them. The constituency and the public is learning about them. And so you hope that there's a cumulative effect of all of your efforts. And it would be a shame to have a great bill that hadn't gained enough momentum yet to pass, but that you didn't refile. Sometimes people think of a refile as a pejorative. I don't. I see it as a work in progress. And I'll give you an example. For the last few years, we have been filing legislation to cause a stem-to-stern review of the way that special education is delivered in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Ooh.
The paradigm right now was basically set back in 1993, somewhere between 1993 and 97. In those years, when we last had a very, very large reform of education before the most recent one.
Was that based upon the ADA?
There were some ADA considerations in that, and there have also been a lot of considerations about the state standard of delivering special education and what used to be the federal standard. You may recall that those were different.
Yes.
And a number of years ago, we changed, and Massachusetts adopted the federal standard. And it's actually still unclear how that's playing out in terms of what students are actually receiving.
Right, what they're getting.
But with regard to the entire system, it's my firm belief, and I have other legislators that agree with this, that we need to review the entire process.
Yes.
And I'm going to give you one example of why I believe that's true. And that is that the model that we use right now to assist local school districts is called the Special Education Circuit Breaker.
Okay.
And the notion behind that, as I'm sure you're both aware, is that when a particular student reaches a threshold, and in this
Yes.
case it's 4 times foundation budget, then the state aspirationally will pick up 75% of the additional cost over that 4 times foundation budget threshold.
Wow.
The reason that I use the word aspirational is we haven't always been able to meet the 75%. Fortunately, in the last few years, because we've had the resources to do it, we have been meeting the 75%. But both of you, because you're very well versed in this area, know that usually when you get to that level of 4 times foundation, it's usually an outplacement, not
Right.
always.
And that,
Right.
but that's what I have with my son.
Yes.
And because I am an attorney in my other life, and I've worked in so many different areas of government, I already knew to get to that, what people call FAPE,
Yes.
which is the fair, appropriate public education.
Free and appropriate.
Appropriate, thank you. That this town has to show that they can't provide the services needed. So for me, knowing all this, every time they said, well, we can try this and we can try that, I was like, sure, let's give it a try. And it got to the point where on his IEP during the late 7th, early 8th grade, I said, what do you got? And they said, we got nothing.
Yeah.
And they had to put him into an assessment center that then ultimately put him into an outplacement.
Yeah.
But I used the system because I understood the system.
Understood.
Right.
Most parents aren't
Right.
in that type of a position. So what would your legislation do?
So I want to just go back for a minute because I want to talk about that, because my point is that right now the only assistance that the state provides is when you reach that 4 times the foundation budget. But yet we always have a conversation, and you have been part of this, about trying to include students. That was what you referenced, to trying to see what a school might have to offer. So right now, one of the things we talk about and proclaim publicly is we want to include students in their local school district. But the state really doesn't provide any support for that. So one of the things that I want to look at is supports we can provide for students that don't get outplaced, so that schools would have the ability to develop those programs so that their answer to you in that scenario wouldn't be nothing.
And he went through the sub-separate or the partially integrated is what they do. They pull them out for math and English, and then they're reintegrated fully with additional teachers' aides in social studies, science, whatever else they're doing. And those classrooms are fuller now than they were pre-COVID,
Yeah.
which
So-
means that the towns need even more.
Well, they definitely do, and I think that we need to align what the state's public policy is with what the state is doing to
Yes.
support the
Right.
school systems. And that is just one example. But it seems to me that we need to be able to provide resources, again, for programs that help students that don't reach that threshold. But we also need to look much more than we do right now at the issue of social emotional learning
Yes.
and mental health in our
Yes.
school systems. And again, unless we have an outplacement, we really don't see those kind of resources coming to our school districts.
No.
I do want to point out, and maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later in the show,
Okay.
but we made major progress in the last legislative session with a mental health bill that we did, providing a $6 million grant program to schools to help them develop mental health programs.
Really?
Now, that's not a lot of money.
No,
but
but
it is
it's-
a good
It's a
start,
start.
and
It's
it's
a
a
start.
recognition that we have much more to do. And I need to point out that one of the things that really helps us as legislators in our region is something called the North Shore Superintendent's Roundtable, which are all of the superintendents who meet periodically with the entire legislative delegation. And that is such a powerful vehicle to be able to accomplish change with regard to subjects like this, that we need to remember that, and we need people to know that it's there. And I'll give you an example of that. So when we did the Student Opportunity Act, going back a few years, back to 2015, 2016,
Okay.
that time period, one of the things that we were looking at was, does the state funding formula, do state funding supports meet the reality in our schools? Are we funding our schools
Right.
appropriately? And one of the things that the North Shore superintendent said to us was that even though we may have declining enrollment, our costs are increasing. And our costs are increasing because we have a more complex special education population.
Yes.
Right.
We have more social emotional needs that aren't being recognized, and we have a greater need for professional development to be able to respond to those things.
And I would also think to get kids to go into education, to filter in as the older generation
Right.
filters out.
Absolutely. That is absolutely the case. But one specific point that the superintendents raised with us was the cost of transportation for special education
Yes.
students. In some cases, as you both know, that can exceed the cost of tuition
Yes.
in a special education program. So working together, we were able to, and again, the North Shore Legislative Delegation, the Merrimack Valley Legislative Delegation drove this debate. And we
Wow.
got transportation included in the circuit
great.
breaker.
That's
And
fantastic.
so that was
Yeah.
very, very significant. And so now we're turning our attention to those conversations with superintendents, and we're talking about special education. And one of the reasons that we're talking about it, and there are many, but one of them is, again, as you both know, the Operational Services Division of state government actually sets the rate that out-of-school
Out-of-district,
facilities,
yeah.
out-of-district
Yeah.
facilities can charge. And the most recent rate adjustment was 14%. So a lot of local school districts are struggling to
Yeah.
cope with that 14%
14%
increase.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
a
it's
lot.
causing us once again to look at this and say, is there a way that we can address this in a better way? Can we help school districts with affordability? But equally as important to affordability is efficacy. None of us wants to shortchange special education students. All of us want to find a better way to serve them.
Right.
And so that comes back again to the reason that I think that we need to, as much as we've done with piecemeal things in the past, we need a comprehensive review.
Right.
We need to understand the role that those Chapter 766 approved schools, what role they play, what role collaboratives and consortiums play. What role does it take for schools, local school districts, to develop their own in-house programs, for instance, with specialists, with folks on the autism spectrum?
Yes.
So there's a
Yeah,
lot of
absolutely.
work to be done here, and I think the time has come for that kind of top-to-bottom review. And I think, and our bill would require, that the review is conducted with the assistance of one or more Massachusetts institutions of higher learning. So we have lots of schools in Massachusetts that train teachers.
Yes.
And we think
Right.
that they should be involved in this discussion, because to your point, we need to think about the future
Yes.
and the
That
folks
makes
that are
sense.
coming into the profession, and how can we make sure that we're adequately prepared. So that's a bill that I'm particularly proud of, and it's one that fits in the category of, we have been filing it for several years, hasn't quite made it over the goal
Right.
line yet, but I'm not giving up.
But hopefully, as an upside to COVID and seeing what we had to do to try to keep these students, all students, going forward, hopefully that opened up people's eyes as to what more is needed now they're back in school. And that should hopefully help your argument to get something like this accomplished.
And to address the fact that during COVID, people really, in some instances, students may have declined during that time, being at
Absolutely.
home.
Yes.
All of the rhetoric around that, getting services, and then having to go right back into in-person and dealing with that shift back and forth when you have people who are at that age of developing, when they're teenagers, and then on top of that, if they have, special education needs, it's a tough time.
And then you add to it what's
So.
going on at home.
Mhm.
Excuse me. You've got maybe people at home who have comorbidities.
Yeah.
So now, oh my gosh, I have to send my kid to school. Now I'm afraid they're going to get sick or be a carrier and bring it home. And then now you've got that child possibly having on their mind, oh my God, if mommy or daddy gets sick or grandma or grandpa gets sick, is it my fault because I went to school? And no child should have to live with that type of a burden.
I think we definitely have become keenly aware of some of the impacts that COVID-19 has had, but I don't think we know the extent.
No.
And we're still learning that, and we're still trying to assess the learning loss that occurred as a result of having to alter the form of teaching for our kids.
Right.
We're also learning a lot more about, again, the social emotional impacts,
Yeah.
particularly with regard to isolation and being
Yes.
isolated from your peer group
Yes.
during the times when kids couldn't be in school. So I think we've touched the tip of the iceberg, but we've got a long way to go.
Now, and I realize it's DESE, so it's not the legislator itself, but what, if anything, has the legislative body thought about? DESE recently upped the scores required with no understanding or accommodation for special needs kids. And these kids can't get a high school diploma, which, let's face
Right.
it, that's the base.
Yeah,
Yeah.
A certificate of completion isn't the base.
Yeah.
A high school diploma is. And it's going to make it even harder for especially these special education kids who aren't as lucky to be put in out-of-district placements with more developmentally abled schools to reach that. Now that DESE is like, well, we're going to reach the standards. They've already got kids who are neurotypical who are having hard times with that as a fallout from COVID. Is there anything there that can try to kind of bring that back a little bit?
My prediction is that you will see a lot of attention paid to that subject in this
Good.
legislative session.
Good.
Standardized testing is always a subject that is controversial in the legislature, and there's always a lot of discussion about it. And I think there will continue to be a lot of discussion about it. And now that DESE has undertaken those actions, there are obviously different opinions about it among
Yes.
legislators. So number one, I would make two predictions. Number one, you're going to see a lot of discussion about that in the legislature, and that number two, you'll be a part of that discussion, Phyllis. So, and I feel comfortable with both of those predictions.
Well, I never have any problem sharing my opinion with your office.
And we appreciate that. But in fact, there's, in my phone in my office, I have all of my staff people, and there's a name next to each button, and then on the bottom it says Phyllis.
Phyllis.
And there's a button for you too. So we look forward to that, because that's the kind of conversation that we need to have. Because for us as legislators, we know that all of the wisdom in the world isn't on Beacon Hill.
Right.
It's in a classroom, it's in a household, it's in an alternative program, it's at the YMCA. It's where people live their lives and where kids are. And we need to talk about that, because we need to make sure that what we're doing is having its intended effect and not an unintended consequence that nobody wants.
And I want to piggyback on what you've discussed and what you have just mentioned about the isolation, about the education system. So I come from the adult world where people have transitioned, and that alone now has become an incredible challenge with the advent of COVID and dealing with programming. So on your side of things, dealing with adults with disabilities, with mental health issues, in many instances on both sides for mental health programs and developmental disability programs, many individuals have not been able to go back into in-person, and in many times the remote programming may not have worked, and we're dealing with people with autism, people with other developmental issues. What is happening on the Hill with that? What is happening around addressing the isolation? People have taken a step back or have regressed in many, many ways. And staffing now has become a huge concern
Yes, the
with
industry
schools.
is bleeding.
Just across the board. So this is part of the reason, because COVID, the Great Resignation. What is happening? What are the discussions around this?
So right now there's a lot of discussion, again, about programs for folks who are past 22 years of age and how we continue their education. We were able to get a bill passed through a lot of leadership in the legislature relative to programs of college enrollment for kids and young adults that helps them to be able to move forward. But I want to touch for a moment on the provider crisis, because it is a serious issue, and we see it across the board. We see it everywhere we go, that we don't seem to have enough employees in a variety of settings. But when you don't have enough employees in a healthcare setting or an instructional setting, those are more serious in my opinion, and we need to work on that. And one of the things we need to figure out is why folks aren't coming back to work and what's going on with the workforce.
I can give you one.
I'd love to hear it.
Wages.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wages. Yes, Massachusetts has, I think I heard in the news, I listened to BZ 1030, and I think it was on there I heard Massachusetts has like one of the highest minimum wages in the country, like the third or fourth highest minimum wage. And now we've got a group talking about bumping it up to like $20 an hour over the next few years. I think right now, is it 15 or 15 and a quarter?
Yes.
Yeah. But how does that stack up against being
That's
able to
right.
have
You know,
affordable housing?
a kid who's going to
Yeah.
college making, or a high school kid making 15 and a quarter an hour, but they've got mom and dad at home, that's
a different
okay.
story.
Yeah.
They've got that money. But if you're talking about these people who need to work 2 or 3 jobs, housing is at an all-time ridiculous high in Massachusetts. We're now talking about layoffs in more white-collar industry jobs. And those people don't want to work the blue-collar jobs, and the blue-collar jobs that people are willing to work in this industry to be home health care providers. They're not getting paid enough
Well, there's a disconnect.
to be able
There's
to
a
do that.
disconnect here. I mean, people can't even afford to pay for the benefit of health care, so
Yeah.
they end up on the connector.
Absolutely.
So, what is the incentive for them when you can, I hate to say, go to a fast food place
Mhm.
and make the same money and not have the same responsibility?
Responsibilities.
It's different making coffee versus having to toilet somebody or deal with a behavior from somebody who may be on the autism spectrum. So those are the concerns.
And it's a rabbit
you know.
hole, I understand that.
Yeah, it is.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And it was always difficult to attract folks to some of these jobs because
To begin with.
they are emotionally and physically taxing.
Yes.
And they're different than other jobs, but it's even worse now that we have a smaller labor pool
Yes.
and there's more competition for those folks. And there's definitely the element of folks choosing to go to a less impactful job, impactful in terms of the toll that it takes on you physically and emotionally, to get paid that minimum wage or something slightly above the minimum wage. And what I hear a lot from employers, particularly in our nursing homes, in our home health care scenarios, and in our hospitals, that folks are making the choice not to do those things because they are more difficult, and to do the other things that they can do to get paid roughly in the same wage spectrum.
Exactly.
But
And
the
the-
quality of mental health, for their point of view, is significantly.
Yeah. So we need to look at this, and it's a great segue because I filed another bill that would create a workforce recovery commission
Okay.
to look at the
great.
situation that we have with our workforce and try to figure out what we need to do to create proper supports and to create proper incentives. And so, for instance, one of the things that we need to look at in the healthcare sector are career ladders. If I'm a home health aide,
Absolutely.
what can I look forward to if I stay loyal to that particular profession? And that's important to folks. We need to give them
Upward
something to
mobility.
be able
Yes.
to move forward. And so I think we need to assess that for the entire workforce. But it's certainly an acute issue with regard to healthcare and special education and things of that
Yes.
nature. And there are a whole series of issues here that I don't think any of us fully understand.
No.
Right,
One of the things that I've been reading about lately is that a lot of folks who were close to retirement because of COVID retired.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
there's no one coming in behind them because
And
the
it's the
demographic
biggest
isn't there.
generation. We're
Different.
talking the baby
Yes.
boomers.
Exactly. And so the question is, how do we backfill that? And in Massachusetts, we've got a pretty proud legacy of education, of all
Yes.
kinds, vocational education, general education, but we need to think more and more about, are we training folks with the skills that they need, and how do we help them
Right.
have that career ladder? And it's a huge issue. One of the issues that we talk a lot about is nursing
Yes.
and the shortage that we have of nurses in Massachusetts. Now, the interesting thing about that is that every school that I talk to that runs a nursing program has far more applicants than they do slots, which tells us that there are lots of folks interested in being nurses, which is good news.
Yes.
So you have a lot of demand on one side because we know we need them, and we have a lot of folks interested. So what's the issue?
It depends on
Education.
the area. Right, it's
Education.
education, but also what area of nursing
Absolutely.
are they going into? Because I know on the day program side, where I was working, the nurses were not paid that well,
Yeah.
and they can go someplace else and make, in some cases, 6 figures and do better than I did in my administrative position,
Sure.
as opposed to being in a day program
Yeah.
or something like that. So there's that piece of maybe equity or whatever it is that you do go through that education, because also you have people who don't have college educations, and people now are changing the parameters,
Yes.
saying, well, you know, if they're willing to come in, we'll train them or what have you. So there's that piece too of what area of nursing or what area of care.
And I think a
are they
great
going
way to
into?
pick that up is the tech schools.
Yeah.
You know, I know that GLTS has some fantastic, Greater Lawrence Tech
Yes.
has some fantastic programs, one of which is healthcare.
Yeah.
And, you know, but the school is only open for the typical high school kids during the day. What about expanding those programs at night for people beyond, for example, the TOPS program that the Department of Unemployment Assistance offers, okay? And having those tech schools open at night for people who are working 2 or 3 jobs during the day
The adult learner.
to get that skill set going. And also expand those types of things. When I was unemployed, you know what I wanted to go back to school for? I wanted to be an ASL interpreter.
Huh.
But I couldn't get into it because it was a full-time program during the day only.
Yes.
And do you know what the need is for interpreters right now?
I
Yeah.
hear it all the time.
And,
Yeah.
you know, I looked into the TOPS program to do that. And they said, oh, no, that's not meant for you because you already have an advanced
Right.
degree. And I'm like,
Right. So you're cut out of
But-
something.
I would have been providing a special service that would be needed and is desperately needed.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that, you know, like I said, it's a huge rabbit hole.
Mhm.
And I think, like you said, we've only covered the tip of the iceberg,
right.
if even.
So we really have, and I'm so glad you mentioned Greater Lawrence Technical School because, number one, we're lucky to have it.
Yes.
And we're lucky to have that kind of vocational education. Number two, it wasn't that long ago that not only was I there, but a lot of our legislative delegation with Governor Baker,
Yes.
because GLTS adopted the program that the Baker administration put forward to keep the school open after hours and make more utilization of its capabilities. And we need to see more of that.
In more areas beyond.
We absolutely
Yes.
do. Not only in terms of programs for adults, in terms of getting certificates and other kinds of specialized skills that maybe not a degree,
Correct.
but certainly a certification that you're
Next step.
qualified for something. But we also need to look at more slots for secondary education at those schools. And that's something that we're going to need to look very hard at because over the years, I think unfortunately in our society, we've developed a stigma that if you don't go to college, then you somehow
Yes.
have a
You're less than.
substandard education.
That's how our generation was raised,
Absolutely.
wasn't it?
It
You
surely
know,
was.
those of us who graduated in the 70s and the 80s,
Yep.
the
It was
tech
the
school,
expectation.
the tech schools were for those people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that other people went on to college. Well, that's great. We have a lot of attorneys. Isn't that beautiful? However, you don't need as many attorneys as you need plumbers these days. Right now, I have every attorney in the entire state watching this going, oh.
So here's a disclaimer, if you're watching at home, Phyllis and I are both attorneys, and we don't mean to demean attorneys because there's an important role for them.
But I need to hire a plumber every so often.
And sometimes,
Everybody has their place, right?
well,
I mean,
that's the point.
thing.
That is the point.
We are not disparaging any professions.
But I think that is the issue.
Yeah.
We need a well-rounded workforce.
Exactly.
And we need to think about how to populate some of those other professions, particularly if you look at in some of the trades, the average age
Yes.
of an electrician in Massachusetts or a plumber.
Baby boomers again, we're talking
Yeah.
about them
Absolutely.
cycling out.
What's the incentive for younger folks to go that route.
And-
How do we attract people?
Hint, hint, they could probably earn, by the time they're 10 years into the profession, more than you or I could earn as
Yeah.
an attorney.
Well, I was going to say, if you look at what we would charge for a billable hour versus what the bill is from the plumber sometimes, you may
Yeah.
wonder if we made the right choice, Phyllis.
Exactly.
I'm not sure. but
But
again,
then we're both in government
But then-
service, so that
so-
pushes that all the way out the window.
So conversely, if we're looking, because we look at the pay rate of direct care staff,
yes.
Yes.
and addressing the issue because, and I've done some research on this, because people are not, you have people, like I said, toileting and doing these really important functions. And it's not to say when you work at a fast food place that there isn't importance, but there's a key difference.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But they're making the same money coming in. So yes, we want the education piece and the training, but I think higher up, what are we, even at the federal level, how do we classify these positions? Because I think that's part of the issue here. There are so many titles that go to these different positions, but they're all paid at this kind of lower level when they're really doing a lot. Like in the day programs, for example, you have people who are really teachers, who are educating. We have them coming in without a college degree, which is fine. They get to learn, but the pay still is not at that level of what they really should be making.
I think the best question is probably because the feds sets the state, the
Right.
state sets the local, so the money is trickling
Exactly.
down to some degree. Yes, you
What
get
is
my
there
tax dollars
discussion about
here,
that?
But,
Yeah.
is there any
Discussion of
cross-communication, I guess is the best way to put it?
So I'd say a couple of things. First of all, our minimum wage is higher than the federal minimum wage.
Right.
It historically has been
Probably
for a
by
number of
almost
years.
twice.
It's significantly higher,
Yes.
and that's a good start.
Yes.
But the difficulty is what we were talking about a few minutes ago, that there's a certain band,
Yeah.
a wage band of folks, all of the folks that are in that category.
Yeah.
And whether it be you're working in a nursing home, helping with some very difficult jobs, or you're working at a fast food operation, they're all pretty much in the same place.
Right.
And how do we make that distinction so that we as a society
Exactly.
say that the person working in the nursing home or as a home health aide or as an assistant to someone with a physical challenge, that has value to us? And how do we set that as separate and distinct?
Right.
And I think there's a couple of different ways that we can do that, but I don't have a monopoly on ideas here, and that's why we need to have a broader conversation.
Right.
But I think, number one, if we certify them in some particular way and
Yes.
give them professional status that allows
That
them
will
to
help.
stand apart.
Benefits, how about
Yes.
that?
Absolutely.
Just put them on Mass Health as a benefit. They're already being paid typically through the state, through that trickle-down system in terms of the money starting at the Fed.
Yeah.
Right.
Give them, as part of your job, if you are a full-time home health aide, I get health insurance, I get it through my husband's, but I could get it through my full-time employer. You get it through yours.
Yes.
You get it through yours. Why not
Give
give
them the incentive.
them the incentive, paid time off, health insurance, all those little things that we take for granted.
So a significant one that we've already started to look at in some areas is loan forgiveness for student loans and
Yeah, I think
educational
that's
loans.
huge.
Yes.
That's huge.
One of the other things that we need to think about, and both of you have touched on it already a little bit, is the cost of housing. So
Yes.
is there something that we can do to be able to assist with that cost that might make it a little bit easier for the budget of
Right,
someone
is there a
that's working?
stipend or
Exactly.
something like that?
I mean, obviously in Massachusetts, we have a housing shortage and we need to work at that. And
Right.
ultimately, the solution to that is to have more supply. Getting more supply takes time.
Right.
So in the meantime, is there something we can do to say that if you're in one of these positions, we're going to help you with your student loans, we're going to help you with your insurance. One of the things that I know you're both aware of is that in the state budget, oftentimes we will create a rate reserve for providers in human services so that they can afford to give a little bit more to folks in these key positions. That certainly is a good short-term solution, and it's not something we should ignore, but
Right.
we should think more about the sustainability and the career path of people that we really need
Right.
in our
Yes.
society, and we need to
Absolutely.
think about just how very valuable they are.
And
Exactly.
especially where we've got two issues. We've got the adults with the baby boomers
And people-
retiring,
yep.
okay? My generation,
Yeah.
we're not large enough to be able to pick up where the baby boomers picked
Right.
up for what we used to call the greatest generation,
Yes.
those of them who went into World War II in Korea. So we have a generational shortage, and we've got baby boomers who are retiring, and they're going to need more and more services because, God bless them, they're living longer.
Absolutely.
There's, what was it, 65 was the threshold when FDR signed the Social Security Act? People weren't expecting people
now
to live
people
into their
are-
80s and 90s.
Yeah, you have
Absolutely.
people living
You
well
know,
into their 90s.
Exactly. So now
So-
you've got that on top of on the other end, which is what I'm dealing with children. So you got from 0 to 100, let's say.
Yeah.
And we've got to be thinking about the 100-year-olds and the 0-year-olds
Yes.
and everything in between. And I do not envy that task that you have to try to even poke holes where you can in that situation.
Well, it's a situation where we need to get started because it is a huge task. We're not going to solve it in a year. We're not going to solve it in 2 years. As you point out, this is a generational issue
Yes.
that we have to address. But I think there are some things that we can do right away. And the first one is to work on destigmatization, saying that you may not have a college degree, you may not have a PhD. And there's nothing wrong with having those degrees in higher education, but it's also very important that you're taking care of my grandmother or my
Exactly.
child.
Right.
And we as a society value that. And we're going to elevate that and find ways to support you in doing it. But ultimately, this is in many ways a demographic problem.
It is.
As you
It
mentioned,
is.
we have a lot more folks that are retiring out of the workforce than are coming into it.
Right.
And we need to figure that out. And I don't think there's an easy answer.
No.
But what we can do is support the workforce that we have,
Yeah.
allow people in that workforce to reach their maximum potential, and then think about some of the things that are going to be much more difficult.
And I want to add one more thing to that piece about the high school diploma aspect. Where I've worked, historically, we've also had a lot of people from other countries
Yes.
who have come in. So there's the English as a, the ESL issue, making sure that piece is addressed, but also people who, they may even have a college degree from another country or their high school diploma, but for whatever issue with requirements, may not be recognized in this country. So we want to make sure we're addressing that aspect of ESL and also acknowledgement of, okay, for some reason they can't, maybe they came up in a war-torn area, they can't even get their high school diploma
Yes.
Exactly.
anymore.
Yes.
What do we do to support that piece too? So I think that has to factor in to it because we have a large population of people from other countries who have taken on this work.
There's no question,
Yeah.
and there are even folks with advanced degrees. One of the things that we're
Yeah.
seeing in Massachusetts is a shortage of general practitioners, MDs.
Yes.
I was reading that in the
Yes,
Globe
that's been going on for a
yesterday.
while.
And so we have filed another bill. There was a commission that made several recommendations on how we could accommodate folks coming from other countries who have that degree of training, who have that level of education, but are not able to enter into the workforce
Right.
as quickly as we'd like them to. So we filed a bill to try to help with that. But I want to make another point, and I don't think we should miss this point at all. So we're talking about the workforce we have, we're talking about changing demographics, but we also need to talk about folks who have various physical challenges
Yes.
that we could be
Exactly.
incorporating into the workforce more than we are now.
Yes.
And that's why the work of commissions on ability are really important. That's
Yes.
why the Mass Rehab Commission is really important, because we need to explore everybody who'd like to be working, who has more to
Right.
contribute. They are a source of solution to this problem.
Exactly.
But we
Yes.
need to work
Exactly.
harder at it. And again, we need to make sure
Totally
that if
agree.
they're marginalized, they're no longer marginalized.
Bring 'em
And they're
in.
brought into
Yeah,
the mainstream.
and they're a higher component of those who are unemployed than those who don't have disabilities.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I hate to say that our time has
I
run
know.
short.
We could go on
We could
for
go on
this
for a long
hours.
We
time.
surely could.
Bruce, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. This is, I feel like you said, you're just touching the tip of the iceberg with this, and we would love to have you back again very soon.
Yes. How's next
Thank
week?
you. How's next week? Yeah. We'll do a part two.
Yes. Once a
So
month
thank
we'll bring
you.
you on.
So number one, I'd love to come back. Number two, I want to make sure that North Andover Community Access Television has enough videotape to be able to keep pace with
We
us,
can
or
keep
whatever
going
medium
for
is
days.
that we use
We can
today.
Not an issue.
But I also want to remind folks that while we're on camera once in a while, we have this conversation
Yes.
on an ongoing basis, and it's really
It's
important,
always-
and it reflects a great partnership.
Yes.
And obviously, I'm happy to come back. I'm normally very shy, but you two were able to bring it out
Come
in
on,
me. So.
you know. And a lot of people don't realize that it goes beyond, I know how to email your office. Anybody can
Yeah,
email your
yes.
office. You've got 2 staffers. I've got their personal phone numbers.
Absolutely.
I've maintained friendships with these people. And I
Yes.
do, keep the line of, okay, this is boo-hoo, I need to talk to my friend, and this is, can you please get the senator on this already? But, commissions like ours were able to do that so that we can develop the relationships to be boots on the ground.
Yes.
Look at what we did before COVID happened with getting those blue buttons installed at that elevator in Lawrence.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was a great example, Phyllis, of something that I wouldn't have thought about if you didn't bring it to
Right.
my attention. But when you did, we worked as a team and we improved accessibility
Yes.
at that station.
And people don't understand, they hear, oh, slush fund, slush fund. The office I was working at the time was right next to where the new state courthouse is, to give you perspective from where Beacon Hill is
Yes.
to that office. By the time I got from your office back to mine, sat down, put my coat on the rack, I was getting an email from Vicki saying, the senator has already gotten the financing and he's put out bids. I don't think I've ever seen a government body do that. That was 15 minutes.
Well, that's the power of teamwork. And I
Yes.
do want to take a moment, if you'll indulge me, just to thank my staff, because they are tremendously dedicated.
Yes.
They work very hard. Mary Ann Ney is actually with us in the studio
Yes,
today.
probably going, come on, wrap it up, wrap it up.
And she works with a lot of disability issues, and she's an incredible champion.
And she's my counterpart in Boxford.
Boxford, that is correct. But we also have Vicky Morey,
Yes.
who was just married.
Married.
So now she's Vicky
Vicky
Morey Daigle.
Daigle.
So we're very, very pleased about that. But I do have an incredible staff. And again, one of the things we pride ourselves in is being responsive when anyone calls. If they might not have your button, Phyllis, on my phone, but there's.
Oh, God, she's calling again.
we like to respond to everybody, and we like the partnership that builds every day.
We appreciate it.
We do, and I'm
Thank
dead
you.
serious. If you wanted to come on once a month
We
and
would
give us
take
an update, and we would do it at night,
Yes.
I'd take time out of my
Yeah.
schedule at night to bring
Yes.
you on and do this and do a legislative update every month if you had the time. Please.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate that. I don't know that we could do every month,
But
but we
Maybe
could
once a
certainly do
quarter.
it a little bit
More
more
often.
frequently.
Maybe
Absolutely.
once a quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
we can do that. We know you want to do it.
Yes.
It's just a matter of time.
Yes.
That's all.
One of the most precious commodities we all have.
And
Exactly.
unfortunately, we are out of
I
I have to be that person.
I know.
Thank you again.
Thank you very
you.
much.
You can reach Senator Tarr at bruce.tarr@mass, or MA Senate. It used to be Mass, now it's masenate.gov, 617-722-1600. I promise you, you send that email, it will get to a staffer, you will get a response, and you don't have to be me. And if you don't get a response, let me know, because I'll make sure it happens. This information is special just for our North Andover residents. The town of North Andover is seeking vacancies to fill on boards and commissions everywhere. Each board and commission has its own obligations. If you're interested in volunteering on a commission similar to ours, please visit the town website at www.northandoverma.gov and click on Board and Com info. It's on the left-hand side of the page. You can complete a volunteer form. You can also contact Jillian Brothers with any questions at jbrothers with an S at northandoverma.gov or at Town Hall 978-688-9510. We're all talking about community electric rates. Were you aware of the town's community choice power supply program? Have you switched back to the town-sponsored plan yet? You can call Colonial Power Group at 866-485-5858, extension 1 to learn more. But you must opt in to get the town contracted rates, and I've seen my rates go down because of this.
Makes a big difference.
Or you can go to colonialpowergroup.com/North Andover. Or again, you can contact 866-968-8065 to ask about the Town of North Andover's program. Applications for the Elderly and Disabled Taxation Fund are due by March 1. If you have any questions, please contact the Town Treasurer's Office at 978-688-9550. And I think I'm done talking for a second.
We'd like to thank our crew this month from GLTS. Actually, from North Shore Academy, we have Zachary Jones, Joan Kafari from GLTS as an alum.
Yeah, and Alex's name didn't make it up
Yeah,
there.
I'm sorry. We had Alex.
Yeah,
Alex was great too.
And he's in GLTS. Our upcoming schedule is almost full. In March, we're going to be joined by the Federation for Children with Special Needs. April's guest is going to be Women's Money Matters. State Rep Trom Wim is going to be here discussing her legislative agenda in the upcoming for the upcoming session in May. And our season's going to be ending in June with our guest, Minnie Meva. I'm already booking guests for October, November, December, and January of 2024. Yeah. We hope to have more news from other members of our legislative delegations, nonprofits we have reached out to soon. We're consistently looking for new topics to explore here at Ability Assistance. We would truly love to know, what topics would you want information about? If there's a specific topic you'd like to learn more about, email me directly at pjones@northandoverma.gov. And in addition to watching through your traditional cable station, you can catch all of our programs on demand. We've got YouTube, we've got the Cablecast app through Roku and Apple TV, you've got the North Andover CAM website, they also put it on the town website,
Right.
and everything is rolled out through Podbean as well. Until next month, thank you.
Thank you.